Hello guys and gals, me Mutahar, and today I wanted to cover the TikTok ban bill, the Restrict Act. Now I wanted to wait a couple days because honestly I'm not a lawyer, so me reading into this stuff takes a little bit more time, and I wanted to really make sure that I didn't want to spread misinformation about this. Anytime a bill like this gets introduced, you'll probably read on the internet, oh, VPNs are illegal. Oh, tons of stuff. The government is spying on you. Patriot Act on steroids. You probably read articles and YouTube thumbnails and YouTube titles just like that. And I really wanted to look into this bill and make sure that this necessarily was in there and this stuff was being covered versus it just being like a vague bill. Now, to understand, I want to start off by saying the reason this exists is not just because of TikTok. Now, TikTok being banned is a hot button issue, and there's pretty much every government leader in unison of banning the application at this point. Whether you vote left, whether you vote right, your representatives tend to agree that banning TikTok is a pretty good idea. And to be honest with you, I can see why. Let me tell you why this act is passing in. It's pretty much because now America is not the tech capital of the world. It's a pretty big player, but now all the other countries have pretty much emerged and have their own specific hardware and software to sort of kind of match up. Now, TikTok is one of the fastest growing social media applications out there, and it's the one social media application that is not owned by an American company. It's a Chinese-based application where the actual data is being exfiltrated or could be exfiltrated to China. That's sort of the hot button thing. Millions of users, 150 million American users, can be peeked into, can be analyzed, can be fed whatever algorithms want to feed them through TikTok, and it's all in the hands of a Chinese company, ultimately. That's pretty much the crux of it. And for now, for the first time, the US government is a little bit scared that they're not the biggest tech companies or they're not the holder of the largest tech groups out there. You know, at this point, it's not just China. Russia's coming out with its own applications. And the next day, India could come out with its own massive application that takes the world by storm. Their cell phones, whatever you name it. It goes beyond just TikTok. This is one thing where the government has introduced a bill that is unfortunately very vague, so they can scattershot and effectively maintain some level of control on foreign applications in the near future. That's pretty much what we're going with right now. Now, to understand, ladies and gentlemen, to read into the Restrict Act real quickly. Now, the Restricting the Emergence of Security Threat and Risk Information and Communications Technology, Restrict Act, is basically an act that is again designed for foreign technology and especially telecommunications equipment as well, social media applications, security software, and e-commerce platforms. Big players in the entire world. Now, I've got the bill right here, you know, all 55 pages of it that we're going to be reading through. I got some few points that I want to be hitting. But again, ladies and gentlemen, let's get to the beginning of this bill. To understand, a lot of people have been comparing this with the Patriot Act, which if you don't remember the Patriot Act, effectively just reading through a very cursory summary of it, the Patriot Act enacted after the September 11th attacks and the 2001 anthrax attacks with the stated goal of tightening U.S. national security. To understand the climate of the Patriot Act at the time, this is literally barely a month after 9/11. Just barely a month. October 26, 2001 is when it was effective. So to understand, the country was reeling from one of the biggest attacks on it, and of course everyone was pretty much in unison that maybe we should strengthen national security, right? That's pretty much kind of what it was going for. And because of that climate, because this law was allowed to pass, it expanded surveillance abilities of law enforcement, including tapping domestic and international phones, easier interagency communications to allow federal agencies, more effective use, all available resources in counter-terrorism efforts, increased penalties for terrorism crimes, and expanded list of activities which would qualify for those terrorism charges. So of course, the law is extremely controversial due to its authorization of indefinite detention without trial of immigrants, and due to the permission given to law enforcement to search property and records without a warrant, consent, or knowledge, though generally they need a warrant or consent to conduct the search. You can imagine a lot of individuals behind, everyone pretty much at the time, and even to this day, were kind of a little weirded out reading into the Patriot Act. And I believe the only reason this really got jammed through was, again, the country was reeling from a very, very, very serious situation that happened barely a month prior. Now, of course, don't let me stop you from reminding that the American government, the federal agencies, the feds, the glowies, absolutely love to try violating as much of your rights and privacy as they can. Let's not forget the PRISM program, where the United States government pretty much wanted to have backdoors in some of the largest telecom firms in the country. And of course, let's not forget the time that the Drug Enforcement Agency bought customer data from rogue employees instead of getting those juicy fucking warrants, okay? For years, the DEA secretly paid workers inside US agencies and companies for access to user data. Yeah, rogue assholes in these companies were getting paid off by the DEA, allegedly, to give access to information that they normally needed to get warrants for. Absolutely deplorable behavior. But what do you expect? I'm not saying the United States was ever innocent. They like to spy on you as much as they can. The only difference between the US and China is China pretty much tells you, we've got firewalls and we're watching for keywords. The US will find all the other avenues they can before having to go to a judge for a goddamn warrant. Now, of course, ladies and gentlemen, I wanted to just move past all of it. The reason why I'm invested into it, and you might be like, but Muda, you're Canadian. I might be Canadian, but that doesn't involve the fact that now I do go back and forth between the states as well. I have a tax thing in the states. I have like work in the states. I'm pretty much involved in the states as well. I go back and forth. And also, let's not forget the fact that if these kind of laws pass in the United States, it's not going to be hard for it to eventually pass in Canada, okay? We're kind of like best friends. We're best buds, eh? So if America does something stupid, so does Canada, bud. That's how things work, unfortunately. So I'm kind of on the ground floor, and any time a law is mentioned where privacy becomes like the first killing blow, I definitely want to talk about it, and I definitely want to share my thoughts. So that's why I am actually invested. I was one of those people that never really wanted TikTok to be banned. If you looked at any of my previous videos, I was always pretty much on the entire point of maybe we should be looking at how to stop our data from flowing out of our devices, out of our systems, to foreign adversaries, rather than banning their applications straight up. I think banning TikTok and banning anything like antivirus solutions or video games puts us on the same level as North Korea and China, where they don't allow foreign applications into their country. Anytime you start banning software and hardware, it's ultimately restricting your choice to participate in any facet of the free world. You don't live in a free society then, you live in a controlled society, and you might as well die if that's where you're living. So reading into this law, there's a few takeaways that I wanted to do, and I screenshotted a couple amendments and I screenshotted a couple definitions that I wanted to cover. So one of them is covered holdings. The term covered holdings means regardless of how or when such holdings was or will be obtained or otherwise come to have been held, a controlling holding held directly or indirectly is an ICTS covered holding entity, and these are the three definitions they have. One of them is a foreign adversary, which we're going to get to, an entity subject to the jurisdiction of or organized under the laws of a foreign adversary, meaning if you're a company that's hosted in any foreign adversary land or you're subject to their laws. Of course, then you've got an entity owned, directed, or controlled by an entity described in subparagraphs 1 or 2. And the way that reads is, if you are an entity that is directed, meaning even if you have your shares, like imagine, for instance, I'd have to say if you were like Tencent, for instance, if they bought like 60% of your gaming company or 60% of your software company or your studio in the United States, and they had a controlling share in your US-based entity, you may eventually be subject to the situation as well, because you would be directed, from what I understand, by a foreign adversary, which we'll get to exactly what they mean right there. B, includes any other holding, the structure of which is designed or intended to evade or circumvent the application of this act subject to regulations prescribed by the Secretary. And of course, the Secretary in this case is the Commerce Secretary. They have a lot more power, which we'll be, again, getting to. So when they mean a entity, right, the term entity means any of the following, whether established in the United States or outside of the United States. So this includes a firm, a government or government agency, so on and so forth, a labor union, a fraternal or social organization, a partnership, a trust, joint venture, a corporation. You might be like, whoa, all these definitions, they're trying to effectively cover every form of corporate entity or business entity that could exist outside the United States or within. Now, when they mention foreign adversary, this is important. It means a foreign government or regime determined, again, by their secretary, pursuant to sections 3 and 5, to have engaged in a long-term pattern or serious instances of conduct significantly adverse to the national security of the United States or the security and safety of the US persons. Now, a lot of this we'll get to, but one of them includes the fact of, I believe it's spying, and one of the important factors was like election tampering, which, like I said in my TikTok videos, if you ever really thought about it, because you're on a social media application around the time of elections, nothing would really stop TikTok from promoting like right-wing or left-wing points to perpetuate whatever cause they would technically want. That's what they're trying to mention by election tampering, right? Like trying to promote one party over the other, or, you know, restrict advertisements or political advertisements, or sort of goad the general population in a specific way. 150 million users, if you can goad like even half of them to vote one way or the other, you might be able to swing an election, which the US would consider, and I would believe rightly consider, election tampering. So again, the parties include the People's Republic of China. So obviously, this is primarily what they wanted to go for. They also mentioned the Republic of Cuba. The US will never be on good terms with them. The Islamic Republic of Iran, as expected. Then you've got the Democratic People, North Korea, okay, DPRK, the Russian Federation, and the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela under the regime of Nicolas Maduro Moros. So they've got 6 entities that they've mentioned which are adversarial. Now, of course, the government, the Commerce Minister, sorry, not the Commerce Minister, the Commerce Secretary, and I believe the House and Senate can both vote if they want to add further adversaries to the list. But these are the 6 so far that have been explicitly mentioned. So, of course, what did they mention by ICTS covered holding entity? So basically any entity that owns, controls, or manages information and communication technology products and services. So things like TikToks, gaming services like video games like Valorant, or even things like WeChat, where they have like messaging services for people all over the world. It has not less than 1 million US-based annual active users at any moment. Now, this amount, the 1 million, is actually very low, okay? Just imagine how many applications exist on the fucking App Store. Just imagine like when people buy those smart lights, like those cheapo smart lights, and they have like the one application that's built out of like a Chinese firm. Imagine how many people must have bought that off of like Alibaba or like Amazon and plugged it in, and that's where they're funneling it. They probably have an active user base of a couple million users, you know what I mean? 1 million users active is not as big as you may think. So when they mention actual risky behavior, let's look at it. So poses an undue or unacceptable risk of sabotage or subversion of the design, integrity, manufacturing, production, distribution, installation, operation, maintenance of information, and communications tech products and services in the United States. Of course, you've also got catastrophic effects on the security and resilience of critical infrastructure or the digital economy of the United States. You've also got interfering in or altering the result or reported result of a federal election as determined in coordination with the AG, the Director of National Intelligence, the Secretary of Treasury, and the Federal Election Commission. That is the one point that they're absolutely shitting themselves over. Nobody wants their elections to be compromised, obviously. And then, of course, D, coercive or criminal activities by a foreign adversary that are designed to undermine the democratic processes, institutions, or steer policy and regulatory decisions in favor of the strategic objectives of a foreign adversary to the detriment of the national security of the United States. So again, like I said earlier, imagine instead of the election, if TikTok could influence, younger voters into choosing a policy that may indirectly benefit the Chinese or any foreign adversary in this list. That, again, isn't in the favor of the United States. They might even consider that to be bad. In fact, it's written here. So, of course, when they do designation of those foreign adversaries, the Secretary may, in consultation with the Director of National Intelligence, designate any foreign government or regime as a foreign adversary, again, only if the Secretary finds that the foreign government or regime is engaged in a long-term pattern or serious instance of conduct significantly adverse to the national security of the U.S. or safety of a U.S. person or persons. So, of course, that's pretty much how it goes. A lot of the power is put towards some of these secretaries and some of these directors very heavy-handedly. Now, initially reading into this entire act, it very much appears that they're trying to focus on a lot of corporations and companies that are from foreign countries that are releasing applications with a sizable US base of users that ultimately have their data in touch from foreign, adversaries all around. Again, the word foreign adversary is very important. This bill is designed for the US to combat China and Russia and a lot of their actual geopolitical enemies, especially when they're releasing applications, not just like TikTok. They've also mentioned things like antivirus software. So imagine if you have antivirus software from Russia, like Kaspersky software. Millions of users are using it at the same time. It gives this Russian state company, or this Russian company in general, not state company, the ability to look into your computer or gather files and whatnot. Now, one of the questions that people have mentioned is, are my VPNs illegal? So again, I wanted to look into it, and I wanted to really see if that was mentioned in this bill. Inside the Section 11 penalty section, this thing mentions right here, this whole bill, unlawful act. It shall be unlawful for a person, in general, to violate, attempt to violate, conspire to violate, or cause a violation of any regulation, order, direction, mitigation measure, prohibition, or any unauthorized or directive issued under the act, included any of the unlawful acts described in the paragraph. So again, specific unlawful acts. No person may engage in any conduct prohibited by or contrary to or refrain from engaging in any conduct required by any regulation, order, direction, mitigation measure, prohibition, or any other authorization or directive issued under this act. No person may cause or aid, abet, counsel, command, induce, procure, permit, or approve the doing of any act prohibited by, or the omission of any act required by any regulation, order, direction, mitigation measure, prohibition, so on and so forth. No person may solicit or attempt to violate or attempt a violation of any regulation, again, under, mitigation measure, whatever of this act. No person may conspire or act in concert with one or other person in a manner or, again, for any purpose to bring about or to do any act that constitutes a violation of any regulation, order, so on and so forth. So the reason why I went through all of that is one term that is apparently believed by people who are reading this bill to be a bit vague. And I'm not a lawyer, but generally the idea is, if you're a VPN company, you might be an individual or an entity or a person that is basically spreading a tool that allows people to circumvent any measure by this act. So generally the idea is, listen, if you're a VPN company that's owned by China or Russia, you're already subject to this act anyways. You're probably not going to be operating here. The government's probably going to want to ban you. But let's say that you're a VPN company that operates within the United States, or so on and so forth. Now, for a VPN company to work, and the reason why most people go to a VPN company is to circumvent issues. So for instance, let's say tomorrow Valorant got banned in the United States, right? The US was like, we don't like this anti-cheat, we don't like the fact that they have Vanguard installed on your systems, we don't want China to have access to US-based systems, so we're banning Riot Games, we're banning League of Legends, we're banning Valorant, and so on and so forth. Now, if you don't agree with this, you may get a VPN, you may route yourself to Canada or Mexico, and you might choose to download Valorant from there. So again, if the way that the law is worded, or the way that it's believed, is if the VPN you're using, if you are routing to another country to circumvent whatever's in the order, there might be some penalties laid out there. That's about where people are going to. VPNs are not specifically banned under this bill, nor is the underlying technology put at any risk for VPNs. What is kind of a little vague to some people, and I wish there was more explanations on this, is maybe there are explanations. If you're a lawyer, please feel free to correct me. But where people really get the VPN scare is, if they implemented this and if they banned applications like TikTok, utilizing a service that allows you to circumvent that ban may put you at risk. And of course, there's a few individuals that looked into it and looked at the civil penalties. So for instance, the secretary may impose following civil penalties on a person for each violation by that person of this act or any regulation, so on and so forth. A fine of not more than $250,000, and again, that's up to $250,000, or an amount that is twice the value of the transaction that is the basis for the violation with respect. Then you've got the revocation of any mitigation measure or authorization issued under this act to the person. Criminal penalties, okay? When it came to criminal penalties, a person, so an individual, who willfully commits, willfully attempts to commit, or willfully conspires to commit, or aids and abets in the commission of an unlawful act described in subsection A shall, upon conviction, be fined not more than $1 million, so again, up to $1 million, or if a natural person may be imprisoned, if a natural person, so somebody within the United States, who lives there in the United States, who has documentation there, may be imprisoned for not more than 20 years Or both. You might get the million, but you might get up to 1 million and up to 20 years in prison, okay? If they really wanted to make an example out of you. Again, if you want it to be like in the seat of the government and give like the government the most like pats on the back here, you may just assume that obviously they're trying to really hammer down on the individuals that are participating in assisting these direct foreign adversaries. Again, I really wish the law was specific when it came to that VPN usage, or when it came to what they meant by circumvention or aiding or abetting. That's where people are kind of questioning. The other weird thing about this bill is the no right of access. So for instance, the inapplicability of the FOIA. Any information submitted to the federal government by a party to a covered transaction in accordance with this act, as well as any information the federal government would create relating to the review of the covered transaction, is exempt from disclosure under Section 552 of the Title V USC, which is referred to as the Freedom of Information Act. So it seems like anything regarding, again, foreign intelligence, information here, anything regarding, I guess, potential state secrets, you may not be able to, or again, it'll be completely inapplicable under that Freedom of Information Act. Which, whenever it comes to things like FISA rulings, so where they actually mention Foreign Intelligence Service Act of '78, again, the use of information provisions of Section 106, 305, blah, 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 shall not apply in a civil action brought under this act. And again, that's pretty much, I believe, regarding to those civil actions. So if this went into the criminal situation, it may be entirely different, okay? But for civil situations, you may not have any control under freedom of information. So we covered a lot, and I know it sounded like pretty much word salad for a lot of people reading into it, but that's kind of the case for a lot of these bills as well, too. Again, I was reading into a bunch of other summarizations into this as well, too. One of them that I think is pretty decent, pretty non-biased from the National Law Review, actually focused into this as well, too. So the Restrict Act, again, as presently drafted, authorizes the Secretary of Commerce and the President to take appropriate measures against ICT products or services or firms providing ICT products. And again, to understand when they come across these specific products, they include desktop applications, mobile applications, gaming applications, which is why I mentioned Valorant in particular, or games from other parts of the world, payment applications, web-based applications, information communications technology, which are integral to AI, machine learning, quantum key distribution, quantum communications, quantum computing, post-quantum cryptography, autonomous systems, advanced robotics, biotech, synthetic biology, computational biology, e-commerce. So basically every form of modern web applications that you could reasonably apply that has users interacting from all over the world. So again, going back to the summarization over here, these are controlled by foreign adversaries that are deemed to pose an undue or unacceptable risk to national security. Such measures can range from an outright prohibition of the ICT product, so a ban, or service, to a mitigation of the assessed risk. Importantly, the proposed legislation contemplates a review process to identify and evaluate the potential risk. So giving due attention to key considerations such as critical nature of certain ICT products, a foreign government or regime is designated as a foreign entity if the Secretary finds it engaged to a long-term pattern. So again, it's not necessarily something that'll be applied immediately. There is a review to this situation, which is, again, a saving grace. Then you've got broad enforcement powers, which is what we were covering for the grand majority of this video. As proposed, the Restrict Act grants the Secretary of Commerce broad authority to take any action as necessary to carry out its responsibilities. Such authority explicitly includes establishing rules, regulations, and procedures as the Secretary considers appropriate, issuing guidance and advisory opinions, and conducting investigations of violations of any authorization, order, mitigation measures, so on. Unlawful conduct. The U.S. DOJ presumably will be a key law enforcement partner for the Secretary of Commerce. The Restrict Act outlines unlawful acts that can result in civil and/or criminal penalties. Those unlawful acts include both direct violation of any regulation, order, so on and so forth. Under it, and inchoates offenses such as attempts and conspiracies. As drafted, a criminal violation will require specific intent, basically proof that an unlawful act was committed willfully. So again, ladies and gentlemen, this act is pretty much designed for the U.S. to have a blanket coverage on restricting a lot of these foreign social media applications and foreign tech applications in general. But again, ladies and gentlemen, it's too broad, and I feel like, the people that are applying this as the next wave of the Patriot Act, I don't necessarily see it as the Patriot Act in terms of it spying on users like crazy. I think it might be an application. It might be like sort of a parallel, if you will, where the government is finally starting to extend its reach and have the ability to ban any of their foreign adversaries if they so wanted to. Now, I personally am in the belief that any foreign application should be allowed in the country or anything. As a Canadian and as somebody that, works in America and goes back and forth a lot, I think it should be the person's right to download whatever they want on their smartphone device or their telephone or their computer device in general, or their gaming device or whatever. At the end of the day, I think the law should be more focused on trying to mandate a lot of these tech companies like Apple, like Google, like Microsoft, to implement stricter privacy controls on their devices. Look, at the end of the day, the problem is, one of the key problems is user data exfiltrating to another country. We need to make sure that on modern smartphone devices, we have better privacy restriction tools that allow us to keep our data on our devices. I made a big deal in the last video when it came to TikTok that one of my issues is I try to keep my data as safe and secure as I can. And I try to basically prevent as much tracking that can happen. Eventually, even if I don't want to interact with things like Facebook or TikTok, because of how the internet works and how cookies work and how cross-site tracking works, it's impossible. It almost is. But you can do a lot to mitigate as much of the spying as you can. I feel like the government should be more focused on stopping all companies, even those in the United States, from sitting there and tracking everything that you do. Blanket banning them doesn't necessarily do anything but restrict actual freedoms and actual abilities for people to spread their voices and messages all over the world. The other big problem is algorithms. Yes, it's true. Foreign companies and social media services can use their algorithms to affect the feel and affect the minds of US citizens as well too, or any citizen, so to speak. And that's a bit tougher to get into. I don't know what the rule can be. Like, should the government have the ability to manipulate the specific algorithms for their specific countries? I don't know how enforceable that is. I don't know if that's even really possible. But at the end of the day, reading this law as it is, I'm sure that at the end of the day, the law is designed primarily to focus on these foreign adversaries and these companies and shut them down. And I don't reasonably see that these laws could be applied to the average person. I don't see the government, punishing the individual and fining them up to 20 years in prison and $1 million if they violate or use a VPN. I do agree with a lot of people reading into it, and maybe that section of the bill is very vague, and that needs to be reassessed if they're trying to jam this through. It's also fucked up that these laws are getting jammed through when there's, really serious events like a shooting, and now you got like the Trump indictment, which, again, a lot of these big national events are happening, which allow the government, so to speak, to push these vague bills through the government, through these channels, without a lot of people paying them the attention that they deserve. I think this law shouldn't pass, and I think if the government wants to attempt doing this, they need to absolutely make it critically aware that nothing in this situation can necessarily affect things like VPN companies, which obviously will be used to circumvent these rules. Like, if they implement bans on applications, there are going to be VPN services in the United States whose sole purpose and user base exists to circumvent bans. Nobody uses a VPN without the express reason of trying to circumvent a ban or hide their internet traffic or hide their IP or pretend they're operating from another side of the world. This is one thing that needs to be explained, and from what I understand, even the lawmakers behind this have said they're not going to be targeting VPN companies and they're not going to be targeting the individual person, which is fine and all. But anytime I see the government implementing vague rules and vague laws, that's not something I feel comfortable in. And I just want to know what your guys' beliefs are on that. I think this law is a bit heavy-handed, and I know there's a bunch of other channels that agree in the same way too. I want to try to be as charitable as I can. I hope I don't spread misinformation, honestly. I'm trying not to. I'm trying to read this the best that I can. I'm not a lawyer. I'm an engineer. And as somebody that knows computers and knows networks more than the average fucking politician, I feel like this could be written in a much better and much more productive way. But yeah, wild law. Ladies and gentlemen, if you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Dislike if you dislike it. I know the video might be too dry, so tomorrow we'll be covering some funny meme shenanigans. Anyways, I am out.